The knock came like a death sentence. 3 thuds on the cabin door, quiet against the scream of the wind, but loud enough to shatter 3 years of perfect, unbroken silence. William Ashford froze, the knife in his hand still slick with rabbit blood. No one came to his mountain. No one ever came. The town of Ash Hollow made sure of that. They'd left him to rot with his ghosts, and that's just how he liked it. He stood in the shadows of his one-room life and waited for the sound to go away, for the wind to swallow it whole. But it came again. 3 more knocks, weaker this time, desperate. A sound he recognized. It was the sound he'd made with his own fists on every door in town the night the fever took his wife. The night his infant son's breath grew shallow and then stopped altogether. It was the sound of begging God for a miracle and getting only silence in return. He moved to the door, a ghost in his own home. He didn't reach for the rifle mounted over the fireplace, though every instinct screamed at him to. The kind of trouble that knocked this softly wasn't looking for a fight. It was looking for a place to die. He pulled back the heavy bolt, the iron groaning in protest, and opened the door a crack. And saw something he hadn't seen in 1,095 days. People. A woman stood there, or the skeleton of one, swaying on the porch like a sapling in a storm. Behind her, 3 little girls, stair-steps of misery, huddled together against a cold that didn't just bite, it devoured. Their faces were hollowed out, their lips the color of a dead sky. The smallest one, a bundle in her mother's arms, wasn't making a sound. Not a cry, not a whimper. Just a terrifying, vacant silence. That silence hit William harder than the wind. It was the last sound his son, Thomas, had made, the quiet of a life giving up. The woman's eyes found his, and in their depths, he saw it all. The pleading, the shame, the terror, the last flickering ember of a hope she didn't even believe in anymore. Her voice was the rasp of dry leaves skittering across a grave. "Please," she whispered. "Just shelter, for one night. We'll be gone by morning." She was lying, he knew it, and she knew he knew it. But there was something else in her eyes, too. A question. She didn't know who he was. Not really. She only knew the stories the town whispered. The crazy man on the mountain. The hermit who'd lost his mind when his family died. The monster. He knew something she didn't. The town had sent her. Ash Hollow, with its steepled church and its picket fences, had pointed her up his mountain. They'd done it with smiling faces and poison in their hearts. They'd sent this dying family to his door as a final, cruel joke. They knew he'd either turn her away, letting the winter finish the job their cruelty had started, or he'd let her in. And if he let her in, something far more dangerous than a snowstorm would begin. He should have closed the door. He should have slid the bolt home and let the mountain have them. It was the smart thing to do. The safe thing. But he looked at the baby, at her still, blue face, and he saw his own son's ghost staring back at him. He couldn't do it. He couldn't be them. Without a word, he stepped back, pulling the door wide open. As they stumbled inside, a gust of wind blew past them, and for a moment, William thought he heard the devil himself laughing out there in the dark. He didn't know it yet, but he'd just let the world, and all its pain, back into his life. And it was going to cost him everything. The woman collapsed into the chair by the fire before he'd even closed the door, her body giving out now that it finally had permission. The oldest girl, Ava, maybe 7 years old with eyes far too old for her face, immediately put herself between him and her family, a tiny, starving sentinel. The middle one, June, just stood there, clutching her sister's coat, her eyes wide with a terror so pure it was almost beautiful. William took the baby from the mother's limp arms. The child was impossibly light, a bundle of rags and cold bones. He carried her closer to the hearth, his movements stiff and unused to the task. He moved around the small cabin with the grim efficiency of a man who had nothing left to live for. He ladled broth from the pot simmering on the stove into 3 bowls. He sliced thick pieces of bread and set out a plate of dried venison. He did it all without a word, his face a mask of stone. The girls stared at the food like it was a hallucination. June, the middle one, snatched her bowl and drank the broth so fast she choked, sputtering and coughing. Ava ate slower, her suspicious eyes never leaving him, watching his every move. She was trying to figure out the price. Everything had a price. She knew that much. The baby wouldn't eat. She lay limp, her breathing shallow. William dipped his finger into a jar of honey and touched it to her lips. Nothing. He did it again. A tiny flicker of her tongue. He kept doing it. A patient, silent ritual, until she began to suck weakly at his finger. The mother, Mira, watched him, and silent tears began to carve clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. He prepared his own bed for them, the only real bed in the cabin. He pulled out blankets that hadn't been touched in 3 years, and the faint scent of lavender, Sarah's scent, filled the air. It was a punch to the gut. His hands shook as he spread them over the mattress. He grabbed his own bedroll and laid it out on the floor by the fire, as far from them as he could get. As Mira settled her children into the warm bed, she saw it, hanging on a peg by the door. A woman's shawl, faded and worn. But it was the dark stains clustered near the hem that made her breath catch. They were old and brown, but she knew what they were. Blood. Her eyes darted around the room and landed on a high shelf. A row of small, carved wooden toys. A horse, a top, a little train. All of them coated in a thick, undisturbed layer of dust. Trophies of a life that had ended here. She felt a cold dread creep up her spine that had nothing to do with the winter outside. She had escaped the town, but what had she run to? What kind of man kept bloody shawls and dusty toys in a cabin that reeked of sorrow? She was too exhausted to ask. Sleep pulled her under, but it wasn't a peaceful rest. It was a dark, troubled plunge into a nightmare where the monster had a kind face and offered you soup before he locked the door. Morning in Ash Hollow came with a fresh blanket of snow and a fresh wave of malice. A neighbor, making a show of checking on the poor abandoned Boone children, found the cabin empty. The chains lay on the floor like a shed snakeskin. The door swung open and shut in the wind, banging a rhythm of scandal. She didn't run to the sheriff. She ran to Martha Bell. Martha, the town's self-appointed moral compass, the richest woman in the county, whose husband had died years ago, leaving her with nothing but money and a heart full of vinegar. Martha's eyes lit up with a righteous fire. She gathered her finest shawl and marched to the town square, her voice ringing out like a judgment bell. "She's gone to him. Mira Boone has taken those innocent children to the mountain hermit." Sheriff Tolver, a man who preferred his trouble in liquid form at the saloon, looked uneasy. "Martha, maybe we should go up there." She broke the council's order. But Reverend Crow, a man whose piety was as thin as his hair, placed a calming hand on the sheriff's arm. "Patience, Sheriff. Let God's will be done." Martha Bell's smile was a cruel, thin line. "Or let the devil's work complete itself," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried to everyone listening. "A desperate widow, a lonely, crazed man. The scandal alone will be her ruin. We don't need to lift a finger. The cold will weaken her, and the shame will finish her. Either way, our problem is solved." The men of the council nodded. It was a clean solution. A perfect, Christian solution that would leave their hands spotless. They would simply wait for the mountain to do their dirty work for them. Back in the cabin, the days passed in a strange, silent rhythm. William was a creature of habit. He rose before dawn, tended to his traps, chopped wood, and cooked. But now there were 4 silent shadows in his space. He communicated only with gestures or by scrawling single words on a small slate he kept by the fire. More wood. Stay inside. Eat. Ava, the watcher, started following him on his chores. She never asked questions, just observed, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She learned the way he set a snare, the way he could tell which way the wind would turn by the color of the sky. They were 2 silent beings, understanding each other in a way that didn't require words. June, however, was a different creature entirely. She began to fill the suffocating silence with song. Soft, humming tunes she made up as she helped her mother tidy the cabin. One afternoon, she found a small, misshapen potato in their supplies and drew a face on it, with a piece of charcoal. She presented it to William with a solemn bow. "This is Mr. Potts," she announced. William just stared at it. She took his large, calloused hand and placed the potato in his palm. "He's your friend now," she said, and then skipped away, humming. William looked at the ridiculous smiling potato in his hand, and for the first time in 3 years, the muscles around his mouth twitched into something that was almost, but not quite, a smile. Mira was getting stronger. The food and warmth were mending her body, but her mind was still a mess of fear and uncertainty. Every time William moved too quickly, she flinched. Every night, she lay awake, staring at the bloody shawl hanging by the door, her imagination running wild. He was kind, yes. He provided for them. But there was a darkness in him, a tightly coiled grief that felt like it could snap at any moment. One afternoon, while he was outside, her curiosity finally won. Her hands shaking, she reached up to the high shelf and took down one of the dusty toys, the little wooden horse. Tucked behind it was a small, leather-bound book. His journal. She knew she shouldn't. It was a violation. But she had to know. She had to understand the man who held their lives in his hands. She opened it. The handwriting was neat, precise. The entries were short, dated. She flipped back 3 years. September 14th, 1871. Sarah's fever is worse. Dr. Adams says to pray. September 15th, 1871. The boy is coughing now. His skin is on fire. September 16th, 1871. I ran to town. Begged for help. Martha Bell shut the door in my face. Said we brought the sickness on ourselves with our pride. The words were a gut punch. Martha. This wasn't just random cruelty. It was personal. She kept reading. September 17th, 1871. Sarah is gone. She died holding my hand. Thomas is fading. God, where are you? The last entry was written in a frantic, almost illegible scrawl. September 18th, 1871. He's gone. He died in my arms. I screamed and screamed. No one came. I buried them both behind the cabin. My words couldn't save them. I have no more words left. Mira slammed the journal shut, her heart pounding. The grief in those pages was so raw, so absolute, it felt like she was drowning in it. But as she went to put it back, something fell from between the pages. It wasn't a photograph. It was a faded newspaper clipping from the Ash Hollow Chronicle. The headline was stark. Tragic accident on the mountain. Sarah Ashford and infant son perish in rockslide. Rockslide? Not a fever? The article was short. It said Sarah had been walking with the baby near the ridge when the ground gave way. It mentioned that William Ashford, the husband, was inconsolable. It also mentioned, in the very last sentence, that Sheriff Tolver had ruled out any foul play, despite rumors in town suggesting Mr. Ashford had been drinking heavily that day. Mira felt the blood drain from her face. A rockslide. Drinking. Foul play. The journal said fever. The newspaper said rockslide. One of them was a lie. And the truth, she realized with a sickening certainty, was infinitely more terrifying than either version. She heard the crunch of boots in the snow outside. William was coming back. She shoved the journal and the clipping back onto the shelf just as the door opened. He walked in, his arms full of firewood, and he didn't seem to notice her pale face or her trembling hands. But as he passed her, his eyes narrowed. He looked from her to the shelf, where a single tiny puff of dust still hung in the air. He knew. That night, the silence in the cabin was different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was charged, heavy with unspoken questions. Mira put the children to bed, her hands moving automatically, her mind racing. A lie. Why would he lie in his own journal? Or was the newspaper the lie? And why? After the girls were asleep, she found him sitting by the fire, sharpening his hunting knife, the rhythmic scrape of steel on stone the only sound. She had to ask. She had to know. She sat across from him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I saw the newspaper clipping," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't stop sharpening the knife. Scrape, scrape, scrape. "It said your wife and son died in a rockslide." Scrape, scrape. "But your journal, it said they died of a fever." He finally stopped. He set the knife and the stone down with deliberate care. He looked at her, and his eyes were not sad. They were cold as the grave. He reached for his slate. His hand was perfectly steady as he wrote. "The newspaper is what the town believes." He held it up for her to see. Her voice trembled. "And the journal? Is that the truth?" He stared at her for a long moment, then slowly erased the slate. He wrote again, just 2 words: "My truth." The implication hung between them, thick and suffocating. The town had one story. He had another. And he was admitting, right there, that his story was not the one the world knew. "Why?" she breathed. "Why lie?" He picked up the knife again. Scrape. Scrape. The sound grated on her nerves, each stroke of the blade a refusal to answer. She couldn't stand it. "Tell me, William. I deserve to know. My children are sleeping in your bed, under your roof. I need to know what happened on this mountain." His hand clenched on the knife, his knuckles turning white. And then, in a sudden, terrifying explosion of motion, he stood up and hurled the knife across the room. It slammed into the wooden wall just inches from the blood-stained shawl, quivering like a trapped animal. The children stirred in their sleep but didn't wake. Mira flinched back, a cry catching in her throat. He stood there, his chest heaving, his face a mask of such profound agony that it stole her breath. This was the grief he'd been hiding. Not a quiet sorrow, but a raging, violent storm. He stalked over to the wall, wrenched the knife free, and turned to face her. For a terrifying second, she thought he might turn that rage on her. But instead, his face just crumpled. The storm broke. A single, ragged sob tore from his throat, the first sound she had ever heard him make. It was a sound of pure, animal pain. He sank to his knees, his body shaking. Tears streamed down his face. And then he spoke. His voice was a raw, broken thing, a relic unearthed after years of burial. "Fever," he rasped. It was the fever. He told her everything, the words tumbling out, choked and fragmented. He told her about the doctor giving up. He told her about running to the town, begging for help, and how Martha Bell had laughed at him. He told her about holding his wife as she died, and then holding his son for hours after he was gone, unable to let go. "When the sheriff finally came up here," he choked out, "days later, he saw the tracks. On the ridge, a small slide. He said, it was easier. For everyone. A tragedy. An act of God. Better than the town admitting they let a woman and a child die because they didn't want to be bothered." The final piece clicked into place, horrible and sharp. The town hadn't just ignored his pleas. They had covered up their own guilt. They'd invented a lie, a clean, simple tragedy, to absolve themselves of their sin. They'd let him become the town drunk in their stories, the careless husband, because it was easier than admitting they were monsters. He was not just a grieving man. He was a scapegoat. The living embodiment of their shame, exiled to his mountain so they wouldn't have to look at him and remember what they did. Mira felt her own anger rise, hot and fierce, burning away her fear. She went to him, kneeling in front of him on the hard wooden floor. She didn't say anything. She just reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. He flinched at her touch, but he didn't pull away. They stayed like that for a long time, 2 broken people in a silent cabin, connected by a pain the world had inflicted on them. A fragile truce had been forged in the heart of his confession, but just as the first glimmer of understanding began to dawn between them, it was shattered. A loud, aggressive banging on the door, not a knock of desperation. This was a knock of authority, a knock that promised trouble. The children woke with startled cries. Ava was instantly on her feet, grabbing a cast-iron skillet from the hearth. William surged to his feet, wiping the tears from his face, the broken man gone, replaced by a wall of cold fury. He put himself between his new family and the door. He opened it, and Sheriff Tolver stood on the porch, his face grim. Behind him stood Reverend Crow and 2 other members of the town council. And behind them all, a cruel, triumphant smile playing on her lips, was Martha Bell. "William Ashford. Mira Boone. the sheriff said, his voice devoid of any warmth. The council has reached a decision. You are both summoned to a hearing at the town hall. Tomorrow. At noon. His eyes flickered to the children huddled behind Mira. It's about the welfare of the minors. We need to determine if this arrangement is a suitable environment. Martha Bell's smile widened. She didn't have to say a word. Her eyes screamed it for her. I'm taking them. I'm going to tear your little makeshift family apart, piece by piece, and there's not a thing you can do to stop me. The walk down the mountain was a funeral procession. Mira felt the eyes of the whole town on them, cold and sharp as shards of ice. Whispers followed them like buzzing insects. Women pulled their children away as they passed, as if poverty and grief were contagious diseases. Martha Bell had done her work well. In a single day she had painted Mira as a scheming seductress, and William as her unholy accomplice. They weren't just outcasts anymore. They were a scandal. William walked with his back ramrod straight, carrying baby Rose on his shoulders. The little girl, oblivious, played with his hair. Ava walked beside him, her small face a perfect copy of his stoic mask. But Mira could see the fear in her eyes. June clutched Mira's hand, her knuckles white. The town hall was a viper's nest. It was packed, standing room only. This wasn't a legal proceeding. It was a public shaming. A spectacle. Martha sat in the front row, flanked by her cronies, looking like a queen holding court. Reverend Crow sat at the head of the council table, his face radiating a smug piety that made Mira's stomach turn. The hearing began, and it was a slaughter. Reverend Crow spoke of moral corruption and the sanctity of the family. Martha Bell stood and gave a tearful, theatrical performance about her concern for the poor, innocent children, exposed to sin and depravity. She spoke of her old friendship with William's dead wife, Sarah, twisting the knife. Sarah would be horrified to see what has become of her home, she declared, dabbing a dry eye with a lace handkerchief. Then others stood. One by one, townspeople testified to Mira's hysteria after her husband's death, her unfit mothering. They were twisting her grief into a weapon to use against her. They proposed a solution. The children should be taken from her. For their own good, of course. They would be split up, sent to 3 different proper Christian families. Mira's world tilted. They were going to scatter her daughters like seeds in the wind. She would lose them. She would lose everything. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but her voice was drowned out by the chorus of righteous condemnation. That's when Ava broke free. The 7-year-old girl marched to the front of the room, her small body trembling with rage. Her voice, clear and high, cut through the noise. "You're all liars!" she shouted, pointing a finger directly at Martha Bell. "You talk about God, but you're cruel. She turned and pointed at William. He is a good man. He fed us when you chained our mama and left us to starve. He gave us a warm bed. He never asked for anything. You're the monsters, not him." The hall exploded. People shouted, "Control that child!" Such disrespect. The sheriff moved to grab her, but before he could, William stood up. The entire room fell instantly, completely silent. No one had heard William Ashford speak in 3 years. His voice, when it came, was like the cracking of stone, rough and deep and full of a terrible power. "Enough!" The single word echoed in the silence. He swept his gaze across the room, his eyes burning with a cold fire that made people shrink back in their seats. "You want to talk about what's suitable?" he said, his voice growing stronger. "Let's talk. 3 weeks ago, this woman and her children were dying. Where were you?" He pointed at the Reverend. "Were you praying for them, or for your Sunday collection?" He turned his gaze on Martha. "And you? You speak of my dead wife? You dare?" "The night she died, I knocked on your door, begging for the laudanum you keep, and you told me to let the fever run its course. You speak of sin? There is no greater sin than the one you carry in your black heart." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Martha's face went white, then a blotchy, furious red. William wasn't finished. He looked at Mira, and the hardness in his face softened into something else, something raw and vulnerable. "I was a ghost," he said, his voice dropping but still carrying to every corner of the room. For 3 years, I was dead. This woman and these children, they brought me back to life. He walked over to Mira, who was staring at him, her eyes wide with shock and a dawning, impossible hope. He took her hand, right there, in front of the entire town. The whispers erupted again, a hiss of scandal and shock. William ignored them. He looked directly at the council. You want to judge our arrangement? Fine, judge this. He turned back to Mira, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. His next words shook the foundation of the town hall. Mira Boone, will you marry me? The room descended into chaos. People were shouting, standing on benches to get a better look. Martha Bell shrieked, "This is a mockery, a farce!" But Sheriff Tolver, a slow smile spreading across his face, slammed his hand on the table. Actually, Martha, he boomed over the noise, it's a perfect legal solution. As his wife, her children would legally be his dependents. There would be no grounds to remove them. William never took his eyes off Mira. He hadn't just proposed a marriage of convenience. He was offering her a shield, a sanctuary, a name. He was offering her his entire life. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw it wasn't just a legal strategy. There was terror there, and hope, and something else. Something so fragile and powerful it made her heart ache. His voice was a bare whisper, meant only for her. I'm not just doing this for the law, Mira. The town fell away. The noise faded. It was just the two of them. Her voice was just as quiet. Why then? He took a shaky breath, the first sign of fear he'd shown. And he said the 3 words that changed everything. Because I love you. Tears streamed down Mira's face. Tears of shock, of relief, of a joy so fierce it felt like it could break her ribs. This silent, broken man had found his voice to save her. He had broken his 3-year vow of silence to declare his love in a room full of people who hated them. She looked at her daughters, at their hopeful, tear-streaked faces. She looked back at the man holding her hand as if it was his only anchor in the world. Her answer rang out, clear and strong, a bell of defiance in the hostile hall. Yes, she said. Yes, William Ashford, I will marry you. They walked out of the town hall not as outcasts, but as a family. Sheriff Tolver, looking genuinely pleased, declared the case dismissed and scheduled the wedding for 1 week's time, to be officiated by a humbled and visibly shaken Reverend Crowe. The walk back up the mountain was different. People still stared, but the whispers were confused now, not just cruel. They had lost their power. That night, as the children slept soundly for the first time in weeks, Mira and William stood on the porch. The air was cold, but she had never felt warmer. He wrapped his arm around her, and she leaned her head against his shoulder. It felt right. It felt like coming home. But as they stood there, a flicker of orange in the valley below caught her eye. It grew brighter, angrier. A fire. A big one. Her blood ran cold as she realized what was burning. Her old cabin. The one the town had chained her in. It was fully engulfed, a pillar of flame and black smoke reaching for the sky. It wasn't just a fire. It was a message. They're trying to erase me, she whispered, her voice trembling with a new kind of fear. To pretend I never existed before you. Let them. William's voice was a low growl beside her. That part of your life is over. But the message was clear. The town, or at least Martha Bell's faction, had not accepted defeat. They had lost the legal battle, but they were now declaring a different kind of war. A war of terror. What if they come here next? Mira asked, the fear a tight knot in her stomach. What if they try to burn this cabin down with us inside? William turned her to face him, his hands firm on her shoulders. They won't get the chance, he said, his eyes hard as flint. But they both knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. That night, another knock came at the door. Not desperate, not authoritative, but secretive. It was Mrs. Brennan, the old widow who'd first told Ava about William. Her face was pale in the moonlight. "They're not done, William," she whispered urgently. "Martha's been paying men from the next county over, drunks and thugs. She's telling them you're a danger, that you stole that woman. They're planning to come for you, before the wedding, to rescue Mira and the children and run you out of the county for good." The threat was no longer a distant fire. It was on their doorstep. They had won in the light of day, but the darkness belonged to Martha Bell, and it was coming for them. The next few days were a blur of tense preparation. By day, they made wedding plans. Mira sewed a simple dress from a bolt of blue calico William had in a trunk. Mrs. Brennan brought her a lace veil, old and yellowed but beautiful. By night, William prepared for war. He reinforced the doors and shuttered the windows with heavy planks. He taught Ava how to load his spare rifle, her small hands surprisingly steady. He showed Mira the hidden escape route he'd dug years ago, a small tunnel that led from the root cellar to a creek bed 100 yards away. The cabin no longer felt like a home. It felt like a fort under siege. The love that had been so new and bright between them was now forged in fear and grim determination. 2 nights before the wedding, it happened. The dog started barking, a frantic, terrified sound. William blew out the lamp. "Get the children to the cellar," he commanded Mira, his voice low and calm as he grabbed his rifle. "Now." Mira's heart hammered as she ushered the sleepy, frightened girls down the trapdoor. From outside came the sound of drunken shouts and the shattering of glass as a rock flew through one of the windows they hadn't yet shuttered. Torches flickered in the darkness, surrounding the cabin, casting monstrous, dancing shadows. "Come on out, Ashford," a voice slurred. "We've come for the widow. Martha Bell sent us to save her from the likes of you." William didn't answer. He moved from window to window, a silent predator in his own home. He wasn't the town hermit anymore. He was a man defending his territory, his family. A shot rang out, splintering the door frame. June screamed from the cellar. That was it. William raised his rifle, took aim at the torch nearest the porch, and fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Outside, the torch exploded in a shower of sparks, and a man yelled in pain and surprise. "He's armed!" another voice shouted. They weren't expecting a fight. They were bullies, paid thugs, expecting a scared, crazy old man. They got something else entirely. William worked with brutal efficiency. He didn't shoot to kill. He shot to terrify. He fired into the ground in front of them, sending dirt and rocks flying. He fired at the trees above their heads, raining down splinters of wood. He was a force of nature, a mountain man in his element, turning the darkness and the forest into his allies. From the cellar, Mira listened, clutching her daughters, praying with an intensity she hadn't felt in years. She heard the shouts turn from drunken taunts to panicked yells. She heard the sound of men crashing through the underbrush as they fled. And then, silence. After a long, agonizing wait, William opened the trapdoor. His face was grim in the moonlight, a streak of gunpowder on his cheek. "They're gone," he said. Mira rushed up the stairs and into his arms, burying her face in his chest. He held her tight. "It's over," he whispered. But it wasn't. As they stood there, they heard another sound, the steady, official beat of horses' hooves. Sheriff Tolver rode into the clearing with 2 deputies, their guns drawn. He'd been tipped off by Mrs. Brennan. He took in the scene, the broken window, the dropped torches, the spent cartridges on the porch. He looked at William, then at Mira and the terrified children peeking out from behind her skirts. He shook his head. "This has gone far enough," he said, his voice hard with anger. "This ends now." The wedding day dawned clear and cold. They didn't get married on the mountain ridge as they'd planned. They got married on the steps of the town hall, in front of the entire town. Sheriff Tolver had insisted. He'd spent the last 2 days arresting Martha Bell's hired thugs, who had all confessed she'd paid them. Now he stood beside William as his best man. Martha Bell was there too. Not as a guest, but as a prisoner, standing between 2 deputies, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The whole town watched, silent and shamed, as Reverend Crow, his voice trembling with what seemed to be genuine remorse, performed the ceremony. William's vows were simple and strong. "I vow to shelter you, feed you, protect you, and love you. Always. Mira's voice was just as clear. I vow to trust you, stand with you, and choose you. Every day. When they kissed, it wasn't just a promise, it was a victory. As William slid the simple carved wooden ring on her finger, Sheriff Tolver stepped forward. He cleared his throat and addressed the crowd. Martha Bell, he said, his voice booming. For incitement to riot, conspiracy, and attempted assault, you are hereby sentenced by the authority of this county to forfeit 1/2 of your property and wealth. It will be placed in a trust for Mira Ashford and her children. The rest will be used to pay for the damages to her former property and for the pain and suffering you have inflicted upon this community. You will then be escorted to the edge of the county and banished. If you ever set foot in Ash Hollow again, you will be arrested and you will spend the rest of your life in a federal prison. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Justice. Real, tangible justice. Martha screamed in fury as the deputies led her away, but no one listened. They were all looking at the new family standing on the steps of the town hall. Husband and wife, father and daughters, survivors. Life on the mountain was different after that. The silence that returned was not one of grief, but of peace. The cabin became a home again, filled with the sounds of June's singing, Rose's laughter, and Ava reading aloud by the fire in the evenings. William spoke more every day. He told the girls stories of the woods, taught them the names of the stars. He laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to shake the rafters. He and Mira built a life together, not on the ashes of their old one, but on the solid foundation of a love that had been tested by fire and had not broken. One evening, a year after their wedding, they sat on the porch in the 2 rocking chairs he had built. The girls played in the yard, their laughter echoing in the twilight. Mira leaned her head on his shoulder. A year ago, she said softly, I knocked on your door, half dead, and with nothing to my name. William took her hand. A year ago, he answered, I was a ghost waiting to fade away. You didn't just bring your children to my door. You brought me my life. Inside, on the heavy wooden door frame, he had carved their names and the date of their wedding. Mira Ashford, Ava Ashford, June Ashford, Rose Ashford, and underneath, a single sentence. The day our family was born. They had faced down the hatred of an entire town, stared into the darkness, and found their way back into the light, together. Their story wasn't just about survival. It was about the stubborn, defiant, beautiful power of choosing to love in a world that tells you not to. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of darkness and redemption.